Last week, I did 90 push-ups straight through. That's a lot of push-ups. And I never in a million years would have thought that that was like possible by anyone my age. And I'm not some kind of super athlete. Like, I'm just like a regular guy.
This regular guy is David Stewart. He now runs a media company called Ageist, but before that, he made a name for himself as a photographer. He recently turned 63.
I had a long career as a photographer, working at really the highest levels of that profession. I did a lot of magazine covers, a lot of advertising. And in my mid-50s, I noticed that anytime I was dealing with people my age, it was always something around them having a problem, that they were medicalized and actually somewhat infantilized.
What David noticed is a discrepancy between the way people his age were being portrayed in the media and how they were actually living. Now in his 60s, he's not only able to crunch through 90 push-ups, he's also started a company that wants to change our attitudes about age, and he's become a sought-after consultant.
I mentioned my silly thing with my push-ups. That's like a really mind-expanding thing to say, like, oh wow, I did that. That's quite something. Like, what else can I do? And once you get into that mode, rather than the what can't I do, what are your possibilities? What are the things that you can do that are totally mind-blowing? And it's only mind-blowing because we're in this culture that says that at our age, we're a handicap in need of a solution. And I object to that. I don't believe that that's true.
To some extent, it is certainly a matter of mindset. The 50-plus crowd of today is not the 50-plus crowd of the 1960s. People are living longer, and they are increasingly healthier and more capable in older age. They are better informed consumers, and they have more time and financial space to pursue dreams that are often forgotten in earlier stages of life with more responsibilities. In short, the 50-plus crowd of today seems to be getting a second chance at life, what some are dubbing a Life 2.0.
In the past, fairly recent past, actually, there was this sort of trajectory that people had to their lives. You know, they were young, they got to college, they'd get a career, they'd work at the career, maybe a single employer for a very long time, and then they were to retire and they'd play golf and die. But what happens is that now it's not a crazy idea for somebody 50 to believe that they're going to live to 100. I think what you're seeing overall is a reassessment of what's possible.
There's definitely been a reassessment of what's possible. But at the same time, birth rates are falling, and for the first time ever in recorded history, there are more people over the age of 65 on the planet than there are under the age of 5. There are also more centenarians than ever before, and the number is growing. I'm Peter Jordan, TOPOSOPHY's Head of Insights, and on this episode of Common Ground, we're taking a closer look at what it's actually like to be a member of the 50-plus crowd today, in order to get an insight into how we can make our cities and homes more age and longevity friendly. Stay with us.
This is a podcast by TOPOSOPHY. For more than a decade, TOPOSOPHY has been inspiring and informing its clients on how to transform places, whether they're neighborhoods, cities, regions, or whole countries. The TOPOSOPHY team works with international organizations, multinational brands, and government agencies around the world, leading them every step of the way to find placemaking and marketing solutions that are built to last. As constantly curious people, the team loves to collect game-changing ideas that are transforming other sectors and draw valuable lessons for the future of places. This podcast series, curated by the TOPOSOPHY team, is just one example of how these valuable ideas are brought to life.
Ageism operates the same way all prejudice does, which is to divide us. It is not based in biology. It is all about power. Ageism as a category of discrimination is the last to sort of bleep onto our cultural radar. So in that sense, it is less examined and less criticized.
That's Ashton Applewhite. She's 70, and a few years ago, she wrote a manifesto against ageism that sought to erase that bleep on our cultural radar. She's spoken for the United Nations and TEDx, and her writing has been featured in publications such as The Guardian and The New York Times.
Two factors that have fed and propelled ageism everywhere in the world are capitalism and industrialization, because if you live in a small community with all ages around you, it is very hard to hang on to any stereotypes about what old people are like or what young people are like. We know more and more and more about the health effects of attitudes towards aging on how our minds and bodies function. Most of the work has been done by this wonderful scholar at Yale named Becca Levy, who just released a fantastic book called Breaking the Age Code: How Age Beliefs and Stereotypes Affect How Long and How Well You Will Live. I really recommend it. And one of my favorite of her studies shows that people with more positive age beliefs, that's what she frames it. I like to think of it as people with more accurate age beliefs, right? People with more fact rather than fear-based attitudes. People with more realistic attitudes towards aging are less likely to get Alzheimer's, even if they have the gene that predisposes them to the disease.
The bottom line is that very often we don't know much about what we don't see, and so we can easily hold on to our assumptions and biases. And, as Ashton points out, these uninformed attitudes can go as far as influencing our probability of getting Alzheimer's. But the fact of the matter is that life doesn't stop at 60 nowadays, and the well-worn path that takes us from school to work to retirement is changing.
How do we begin to sort of change the way we think about, I go to school, I learn something, I have a career, and then I retire? That model doesn't work.
That's Gretchen Addi. She's a designer and consultant dedicated to age and longevity-friendly design. She was an associate partner at IDEO, an award-winning global design and innovation company. She recently spent some time in Singapore, a country that's pursuing age-friendly policies to respond to a demographic shift.
And, there's a whole bunch of older adults who want to contribute, but there's not necessarily a way for them to do it. And that was one thing I saw very clearly in Singapore, is they've raised the retirement age so people can work longer if they choose to. And there's a lot of very public-facing public service announcements and posters and things about, you cannot age discriminate. And that's something I'm hopeful will come to be more here as well, because the billions of dollars that we're losing in knowledge and knowledge sharing and ability to contribute is ridiculous.
Gretchen is pointing to the fact that we tend to disregard older adults in the workforce when they hit retirement age. But, as David told us, these days older adults are far from useless by the time they hit 65. His magazine, Ageist, is dedicated to publishing stories about older adults exceeding expectations. Many of the people he covers for his magazine are changing lifestyles, jobs, and homes after the age of 50. Some are starting businesses, others are learning new skills, many are doing all of the above. So why are we so hesitant to keep older adults in the workforce? And why is it important for them to keep working?
In the workplace, ageism is rampant. It takes many forms. Just this morning, I got an email, and I get them all the time, from older people who have been told they are worthless for 5, 10, 15 years, who are broke, who are in despair because they are told that the very thing that they spent years learning to do and get really good at, that their experience has become a liability. And that is just nutty. You always want a mixture for obvious reasons. A diverse group makes better decisions and has more experience and knowledge to draw on. And P.S., there is a global labor shortage. And there are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of older people desperate for work. So you want a solution to the so-called Great Recession, look around you and hire some of the older people who are eminently qualified to do the job.
Another reason why older adults are struggling is because our homes, cities, workplaces, and amenities are not often designed with their needs in mind. Even things made for older adults specifically can miss the mark. Here's Gretchen again.
A classic example is the walker. It's been around forever. It's this sort of iconic presence now, but it's terrible design. The walker actually makes you worse. It doesn't help you. It provides a bit of safety and security, but if you continue to use it, it destroys your gait, your walking pattern. It gets you hunched over. It handles your front vision quite well, but it certainly doesn't help you with people coming up behind you, which can be quite unnerving. It's just terrible. And it's been around forever. And there have been some efforts to try to redesign it. None of them look particularly great. And an older woman that I worked with, who I actually hired as a designer in the last company that I worked for, who was in her 90s, she insisted that, there shouldn't be walkers. People should have walking sticks. And she designed her own, basically, to be able to, keep her gait proper and to be upright.
In order for design to be purposeful, it must be in touch with the needs of its target users. But, as David told us, it seems that the people who are most in touch with the needs of older adults are older adults themselves. But how often are they actually consulted in the design process? Gretchen and the 90-plus-year-old designer in her team seem to be the exception.
First of all, designing for older adults isn't necessarily exciting and sexy, and it could be, but people don't see it that way. Most often I find, even working with startups in that space, that they don't do their homework, they don't do their research, they don't really understand what they should be designing for.
So, one approach to making design more age-friendly is to do the research, as Gretchen puts it. But another is to hire older adults to do the designing themselves. That said, it'll take a while for our products to become more age-friendly, decades perhaps. But what about the spaces we call home? Are they fit for aging?
The only reason people go into senior housing these days is because they absolutely have to. Like they're barely ambulatory, and they know they need some kind of a solution, so they're going to go there. But that model is just, people don't want that.
That's David again. He's pointing to an important trend in senior living. Aging in place, that is, the choice to grow old in one's own home, is definitely becoming more popular and necessary.
My pathway in, I think, started in a very personal way. My father, in his late 80s, came to live with my family, my husband and my 2 children. And because he had very limited mobility, it really required some major renovations to a 3-level home to make that happen. And I realized in the process of having him live with us that even for someone like myself, who was, trained in design and knew about accessibility and all of those things, it was incredibly hard.
While caring for her father, Gretchen faced a reality that many caregivers have long faced. Our homes are simply not adaptable. And, as Ashton tells us, this isn't ageist design, it's ableist design.
An enormous amount of our apprehension about growing older is about the loss of physical or cognitive function. And I just want to say cognitive loss is not inevitable, but our senses do dull. We do lose muscle strength. Our balance starts to deteriorate. Some degree of physical decline is inevitable. That is not actually ageism. It is ableism, which is stigma and prejudice and discrimination around physical and cognitive capacity. And it's important to know the difference.
So really, We're creating homes that are not very adaptable to a range of needs, not just those of older adults. As the population ages, the need for universal design that takes into account the diverse needs of a wide range of users is a concept that we're going to have to become a lot more familiar with.
Aging in place. I personally don't like that term. I actually prefer living in place or living in home. People want to stay in their homes, wherever that might be. It could be a condominium, it could be a single family home, it could be in a housing complex. It could be a lot of different things. And so what people want to know is that that place can adapt as things change for them over their lifespan. And the focus quite often with aging in place is looking at older adults. But as a designer, I say, it's not just about that. It's about creating a place that will age over time and handle all the different stages of our life. We go to great pains to baby-proof our homes and make sure that it's safe for our baby. And there are other life stage kinds of things that you need to adapt to. My personal favorite that I love to pick on is the plumbing industry, because it's basically everything is kind of set in stone in that you can't change things, and there's no flexibility, there's no adaptability built into things. And once you adjust it, you're kind of locked in. It's a major effort to change something. And I would argue that, homes should be designed so that, a toilet can move up and down. So, if you have young children in the home, they can adjust the toilet to meet their needs. If you have an older adult in the home, they can raise it up and make it more accessible to themselves. And the marketplace needs to accept the fact that we need to do those kinds of things, that you can't just keep tearing things down and throwing stuff away, that we need to build adaptability into our homes from the very beginning, or find a way to go back and retrofit older properties in a way that's easier.
And this is something that can be encouraged through policy. Our cities can help us make our homes more accessible and adaptable by making it easier to retrofit. For example, with subsidies for slip-resistant floors, access ramps, and handrails. This is something that can be integrated into public space as well, as was done in 2016 in Viborg, Denmark, when the city renovated all historic locations so that cobblestones, steep hills, and stairs could be more accessible. And anyone who's taken public transport in Japan will be familiar with a system that's well designed and looked after, especially for an aging population. According to consulting firm Arup, cities have a lot to do in other respects to be ability friendly. They can create compact, mixed-use environments that shorten distances between homes and destinations. Think having a doctor's office next to the supermarket, or a well-equipped pharmacy in the same building as a community centre. Back in Denmark, the Flex Danmark bus service sees drivers serve personalised routes on each trip. This way, passengers with limited mobility that qualify for the service can be transported directly to their destination. This is an accessible way of designing transportation. But Denmark is one of a handful of good examples. Unfortunately, most other countries aren't quite there yet.
I rely on mass transit. But it used to be that, I live in a neighborhood with tons of younger people. And I used to say, I need to hustle up the stairs, as fast as the kids. That's sort of a metric for myself. And then I was like, forget it. There was a brief moment of hope when I could go up the stairs as fast as the person in front of me. And then I realized that was only because everyone was looking at their phones the minute they had a signal. So everyone slowed down. But anyway, the point is that I would be carrying my suitcase and, wheeling my suitcase and a computer bag and my purse. And I started forcing myself early on to ask someone to carry this suitcase down the steps for me. And people are so happy to help. The whole discourse around dependence and independence is so harmful here. We have so much to learn from the disability community, which cherishes overtly their interdependence.
A 2013 study by Oregon State University conducted a series of in-depth interviews with older adults and their loved ones, and concluded that older adults are often hesitant to ask for help because the kind of help their loved ones often give makes them feel old, and old means weak, which we're taught is something to be ashamed of.
Our culture, at least in the US, really pushes all of us from a very early age to focus on our independence. And it really comes back to bite us when we get older because we're afraid to ask for help and we feel like we'll be a burden. That's where the isolation comes in the sense of people, wanting to stay in their homes. In some cases, that's great. In other cases, it's not because they become even more isolated and the community doesn't know that they're there and they don't want to ask for help because that's a weakness.
We can never hope to be completely independent, so it's important to normalize asking for and receiving the help we need from those closest to us. And even if families aren't always around, there are other ways for older adults to remain connected. Here's Gretchen again.
There are villages all across the United States. It started out as a very grassroots effort by some folks in Boston, and the model was then sort of replicated across the US. In California, I think there are now some 60 villages. But the idea is a membership model. It is what I would say is the intersection of healthcare and social care. And the way that in San Francisco we describe it is, operationalizing love in a very ageist society.
Gretchen's initiative of so-called operationalizing love in a very ageist society has been turned into something very tangible indeed. It's the San Francisco Village that she's a board member of. This residential community is just one of a few ways to offer older adults one of the most important ingredients for safety and wellness in old age, a sense of community. In the United States, nearly 26 million of those aged 50 or over live alone, an increase of 11 million from the year 2000. Many of them live in large homes that are unfit for their needs because the housing stock in the US is mostly comprised of larger houses. It's hard to downsize when there aren't many small properties around. And although many older adults who live alone are positive about their lives, research shows that aging alone can lead to a shorter lifespan and declining physical and mental health. So when there is a trend of living in place among older populations and an aversion to asking for help, in the end, it's really up to cities to find ways to ensure that these older adults stay connected to their communities.
Here in San Francisco, where I live, the city of San Francisco has a Department of Aging and Adult Services. They provide a lot of services, but quite often people just don't know that those services exist. And so there are organizations who really step up to leverage those services and extend them in many ways. And even the San Francisco Village that I'm connected with here, which is a non-for-profit membership model organization to help people age in their homes, they get funding from the city because their marketplace is sort of the middle income older adults. And the city doesn't pretend to believe that it can do everything for everyone. And so it provides grant money to the village to support that part of the population for them.
Another way cities can support older adults is by promoting intergenerational co-housing. Think a university student renting a spare room in the house of an older adult. Initiatives like Paris Solidaire in France match homeowners with young people who can provide company and support in case of emergency. Other initiatives, like the Good Gym in the UK, encourage everyday joggers to drop by the homes of older adults during their runs to help with errands, or just to have a good old chat. But cities can encourage community engagement in other ways too. They can provide financial incentives for living close to family, and they can locate things like senior centres close to facilities used by all age groups. Or maybe they can get rid of senior centres altogether. Here's Ashton again.
I don't want senior centers. I want community centers that are for everyone, where activities beyond childhood are not oriented at older or younger people, because guess what? Older people like to do the same things that younger people do. In my world, we would wean ourselves off the word generation and the idea of generations entirely, except in the really narrow sense that I am one generation, my son is another generation, my parents are another. Other than that narrow meaning of generations, there is no scientific basis for the term. The minute you refer to generation, whatever it is, you are lumping everyone born within some vague set of years into a same category. And that, obviously, that cannot be true. But I think the most important thing about it is that it obscures the way more important role, a function of class in shaping our experiences and identities, and gender and ethnicity all shape our experiences and affinities far more than age does.
What Ashton is telling us is that a lack of ability is felt more strongly by those who don't have the means. Since most of our cities don't offer the provisions for everyone to age in place equitably, those who can afford to can get a lot more of their needs met than those who can't. Think about it. It's a lot easier to say no to public senior housing when you can personally afford retrofits, in-house help, or a membership of the San Francisco Village. Which is why it's essential for cities to look at things like income when they design initiatives aimed at becoming more age and ability friendly. Gretchen, who's spent most of her career in the United States, agrees.
I often say that, design and designers in this country are for people who can afford it. And I think when I spend time in Singapore and in Japan, I feel like, design is for everyone. So thinking about, there is perhaps this perfect model of the 15-minute city, and how does that play out in different places? And I think Singapore has done a great job of sort of making sure that access to services, to food, to being healthy, to going to a park, to having green space, to have community, to places to be able to socialize, is a big priority for them, but they're one city, a city-state.
These are certainly things that can make a city age-friendly, but they're also things that can make them longevity-ready. Aside from making the urban environment friendly and accessible for older adults, a 2021 paper in Nature magazine argues that we should also focus on designing our cities in a way that will enable younger populations to age well. This is not a revolutionary idea, but designing our cities in a way that promotes healthy living will make living longer and better lives fairer and more equitable. Having access to good food, green space, clean air, a good standard of living, sadly, these aren't things available to everyone, but they are the sort of things that can promote longevity for society as a whole. So, what lessons do we at TOPOSOPHY take from all this? Firstly, where the role that older adults play in society is concerned, we need a complete shift in mindset. The demographic shift that we think is coming in the future is actually already here, and we need to embrace it firmly by finding ways to include the 50-plus crowd. Secondly, seeing aging as a process of continual reinvention instead of steady decline can encourage people to find new careers and pursuits well beyond their 50s and 60s. However, governments and companies will need to help out by understanding older adults' true ambitions and providing things like reskilling and education programs for all age groups. Thirdly, urban life and solo living can make older adults feel isolated and alone, leading ultimately to worse mental and physical health. Cities can alleviate this through policies and initiatives that help them to build real-life social networks that can ultimately help support rich and vibrant communities. Furthermore, aging in place shouldn't be accessible only to those who can afford it. In fact, we need to consider it a social and economic imperative. This is why we need to adapt our cities, offices, shops, walkways, and bathrooms to everyone's needs. And to do so effectively, we must actively listen to those people who have additional needs and include their perspectives in decision-making processes when we're upgrading our cities. Ultimately, city planners must adopt the principles of universal design to make places that can handle all the stages of our lives. Adaptability is the name of the game. But beyond that, in order to facilitate independent living regardless of ability, we need to ensure proximity. Amenities must be close to one another, and public transport needs to be efficient and accessible. Finally, we know that people with greater disposable income and stronger social networks are able to age in place with greater ease, which is why cities need to work harder to ensure that everyone has the chance at aging in place, regardless of whether they can afford to or not.
The reason I say that a world that is better to grow old in is better for everyone is twofold. One is everyone ages. It is the one universal human experience, and ageism is the one form of prejudice everyone encounters. The other reason I say it is that we know, this idea of intersectionality, that all forms of oppression inform and reinforce each other. These are linked systems: ageism, sexism, racism, homophobia, right? When we chip away at any of them, we chip away at the fear and prejudice that underlies them all.
I do see a lot of energy in the building space and a lot of conversation, partially because so many people are rejecting the idea of senior living, and they do want to age in place, or they want to age in community, but not a community of just older adults.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Common Ground by TOPOSOPHY. It was developed and produced by the Greek Podcast Project, with production assistance from Gaia Lutz, and it was curated by our team at TOPOSOPHY. Next time on Common Ground,
when we have so much waste that we estimate in the system, this puts an incredible imperative out there, I think, to really focus on food loss and waste as a response to the food crisis and food shortages.
we speak to the leading chefs, scientists, and environmental experts that are designing waste out of our food system. From the restaurant without a bin to the towering tech-heavy world of vertical farms, we discover what can be done to confront a food waste crisis and how our towns and cities can accelerate progress.